Tonight we're talking about chat interfaces for continuous integration. And before we get started, a little background about me. My name is Scott Underwood. You can find me on Twitter at Scotty Underwear. You can follow me if you want to be disappointed. And I mean, occasionally I have like a bomb every month where I get 4 or 5 likes, but that's like, 3 or 4 weeks between each one. So check me out there. I work for Troops, been there for about 2 years. I'm a backend engineer. Troops is a Scala shop. Having said that, all of our engineers are generalists, so we all write a lot of JavaScript. And we all do a lot of stuff like infrastructure and wear a lot of hats. What does Troops do? Troops builds automation for key workflows for sales teams and customer success teams. So we've learned a lot from our customers, and these learnings have kind of informed a lot of our internal processes, which is important tonight. Why do they use Troops and why automation in sales workflows? Well, when we looked at the sales process, we saw that it was rather painful. Salespeople have to live in CRMs all day. There's antiquated forms and fields they have to use. These are largely just a system of record. Where business is actually done is not in a database, but by people. People communicate with messages or by the phone. And Slack has largely become the operating system of the office. It's where all the communication collaboration is happening. It's where all the work's getting done. I don't really have to sell you guys on Slack probably, given that this is a Slack-themed evening. We use Slack very heavily at Troops. So while this is an improvement over traditional communication mediums for most salespeople, there's still pain points. So let me illustrate some of those real quick. Here's an example of sales workflow in Slack. You have a manager, Dan Reich, saying, what's going on with a Microsoft account? You then have a lot of time passing as Scott, the sales representative, goes and logs into all these different systems to figure out the answer to Dan's question. This is tedious. This is, outside of Dan's vision. Dan doesn't know what's going on. He just doesn't have an answer. After some period of time, Scott's logged into Salesforce. He's logged into his email, maybe his calendar. He's figured out like, oh, okay, something's going on with Microsoft. So he responds. First show of increased pricing went great. And then maybe some chatter happens and Scott says, hey, Dan, do you want to be the Salesforce owner for this? Because I don't think it makes sense for me to do it. Dan then has to go back into those systems to make himself the owner. So a lot of fragmentation of data, a lot of work happening outside of collaboration, context switching, and wasted time. So in the Troops world, same scenario. What's going on with the Microsoft account? Troops responds immediately with customized data, exactly what you want to see, and it also provides you the ability to take action upon that data right there in Slack. So no more logging into these different systems. Everything's happening right there. Everything's fully transparent. This is kind of an on-demand usage of a CRM, but we also do a lot of other things like push intelligent workflows to people. An example of that is call logging. A lot of times salespeople are on the phone all day. And at the end of the day, they may or may not have taken notes on those calls. So what we'll do is automatically send them a reminder in Slack to say, hey, why don't you log your meetings that you took today because you haven't yet? Or why don't you create a contact because you haven't yet? And this gives you a dialogue in Slack, inline ability to log information directly to your CRM. So these features are all kind of based on a core belief that we have at Troops, and it's insight plus action belong in the same place. And moreover, it's that humans are very error prone and slow, and that machines are very reliable and fast. So any repeated tasks should really be automated, right? Like it's evolution. We all know where we're going. We all remember what happened in Hawaii. That was fun. That was human error, right? So with all that said, Troops engineering, we have a complex technical product to build. We wanted to apply all of this thinking to our internal engineering culture. So let's talk a little bit about Troops engineering. We're a Scala shop, like I said. We're in a very new market, so we knew we needed to deploy a lot of things quickly and run a lot of small experiments with our customers. So we wanted to invest really early in some of this automation, particularly around integration and releasing, right? So there are a lot of tools out there that do this. We started using some of them. We started automating some small steps of our process. We built a build server in Circle CI. We set up code deploy for moving code from our artifact repository to our production environments. And over time, we kind of built out a little pipeline of small repetitive things being a button press or even automatic. However, we still had to manually interact with each one of these individual systems. So that kind of looked like this. And you see here, the developer has to, in order to steward their code from their machine into our product, interact with a code repository, build test server, artifact repository, database migrations they might have to run to update things. You know, there's configuration files that might live on a static file server. And then there's the environments we have to push the code to. So there's an increasingly complex set of steps and number of tools to interface with. And everyone you have to hire has to be trained on all this stuff. Moreover, you have to give credentials to everyone to access it, right? So there's some security implications. As we started to grow and scale, this started to involve more and more things, and shipping became more and more difficult. So when we talk about shipping process, what are we talking about? We're talking about functional testing, making sure your code works on your machine. We're talking about updating databases, potentially configurations, new rows, new columns, et cetera. You have to get your code to pass code review in order to ship. You have to potentially update internal wikis. You're going to need to get sign-off, user acceptance testing, and then you're going to need to push the built artifacts to environments. If you're into acronyms, you can see that this process is prone to some problems. Now that not only are there a lot of things to foul up, this started taking us a lot of time at Troops. So after a while, we got to the point where deployments were taking nearly an entire day to run. I've worked for the government before. That's not that impressive. Like a truly impressive release takes like 3 days, but a day's a long time in 2018. There's 14 steps to run through. We had an internal wiki. It's a lot to ask, right? So because of this, we were deploying code once a week. This was problematic. It led to a lot of dependencies between our applications. If 5 developers put out code and 4 of the developers put out good code and 1 put out bad code, there was messy rollbacks involved. There was confusion around what features got shipped, which didn't. And we had a lot of issues with transparency as well as just putting the things out there, right? So here's an example of things I pulled out of Slack. This took 5 minutes to find last year. When things were broken, no one really knew where it was broken, and also like no one really knew what went out to production. So that became a pretty big problem for us. A lot of the information was buried behind the scenes in these subsystems in our pipeline of, like automated releasing. And this was kind of hurting our delivery timetables and moreover hurting our customers. So we had to do a better job at that. So where do we start? Yeah, there's a lot of examples. We started by exposing the process. So we added stronger process. We started using a standardized Slack message as a single system of record and exposure. We kind of combined this with webhooks from some of these tools. So webhooks give us a little bit better transparency as to what's happening in those systems when. And this kind of worked a lot better for transparency's sake, but was still very manual and time consuming as we still had to interact with each one of these systems individually. So the main problem here is that action and collaboration was taking place in different systems. So this seemed like a really familiar problem. If you think about the problem Troops solves for salespeople, you can kind of map it one-to-one with the problem we were having with our releases and our deployments. There's a big fragmentation of implementation problem or information problem. Like there's 6 systems here. They all have different information in them and they need to be exposed to people. There was friction dealing with that many tools. There was lack of transparency into where in the process we were at a given time. So there's a lot of wasted time here. So what's the solution? We knew we needed to go towards full continuous integration and deployment and put the Slack special sauce on top. So when I say full continuous integration and deployment, what I'm talking about is integrating and shipping new changes to product in a rapid, sustainable manner. Basically like releasing new code easily and often. So as we started to move towards that, we knew we wanted to do it in Slack. And we wanted to replace Adam with a robot, is basically what I'm saying. So we could either build this solution or we could buy it, right? We thought about that, and when we talk about buying the solution, the problem with that is other systems have proprietary configuration, there's learning curves to them, there is limited ability to support encoding our own process. An example of that would be, say we want to only allow releases certain periods of certain days. Other tools might not support that. They might not. A lot of things like that, very limited as far as buying a solution. And webhooks are read only. So really great to show all this information in Slack, but still have to go log into the system to interact with it, right? So unfortunate. When you think about building, these systems all have APIs. You know, Circle has an API, GitHub has an API. Most any of these tools have APIs. So that allows us to a little bit more easily encode and change our process around them. So they're a bit more flexible. And we get the actionability, right? So we can take action right from Slack and right back into these systems. So obviously we chose build. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our internal tool that we built for this process called Call of Duty. And the reason we named it Call of Duty is because when duty calls, the troops are deployed. So what is it? Call of Duty is a standalone Scala application that is deployed within our own system that wraps a lot of these CI/CD tools APIs. It essentially acts on behalf of us as we interact with the tools. So how do we use it? We can invoke it with a simple / command, and we are going to go ahead and see it in action. So let's just do a quick demo. Anyone want to see me release to production right now? Yeah, sweet, let's do it. Let's figure out how to do this. So for the sake of the demo, let's find a quick bug. Looks like there's missing period here, right? So this sentence has a period. This is our website, by the way. The second sentence doesn't. So, oh, look, in our live product, we're missing a period. It's probably going to cost us a lot of money. Like when the user doesn't see that period, they're probably going to go use a different tool. So we're going to go ahead and fix that right now. And to do that, I've already actually written the code because I know you guys don't want to see me write code. That's boring. I've got a pull request out, and what that is just the fix for the bug, and it's the change in the code, right? So if you look at the files changed, you see I've added the period to the end of that sentence, right? And important to note here is that I've gotten some approvals. So my team members have looked at this and decided that I added the period in the correct place, and that means that I can release this. So why don't we go into Slack and invoke our tool? So I'm in the deployments channel, which is the only channel in which you can use our tool. We've coded it that way. And I'm going to go ahead and /cod for Call of Duty and deploy web UI. Web UI is the name of our front end. So the first thing I'm going to get is a prompt. It's going to say, let me make this a little bit bigger. It's going to say, are you sure you want to do this? Because we want to guard against human error, right? So we want to make sure we have checks for people doing the wrong thing. Yes, I'm sure I want to do this. So I'm going to click yes. First thing I'm going to see is a menu. It's going to say, choose an approved PR. And the reason I showed you those approvals is because we've also encoded that piece of our process into this tool. It's only going to show me PRs, pull requests, that are approved by my colleagues. So, oh, looks like I'm the only one here. I'm going to go ahead and select that. The next thing the tool is going to do is go and interact with GitHub. It's going to take the pull request, and then it's going to tell Circle to kick off a build, right? it's going to give me a diff. It's going to say, okay, here's the difference of the files you want to put out and the master branch. So look at the diff. I say, oh, good. It's just my one commit, and there's one file that's changed. It's the workflow library. This looks good. So I'm going to hit yes. Cool. So now the tool is going to go ahead and tell Circle, which is our build server, to build the artifact that we need, the artifacts that we need to deploy. This is going to take a little while, so I'm going to continue with the presentation while we do this, as we don't need to really watch grass grow. So. Cool. So we've kicked off our build. We're going to wait for that. I'm going to go through some of the features of Call of Duty while we wait for it. First thing to note is the PR step, right? I just showed you that. You start to deploy. You can only select approve PRs. The next step is the diff step. You just saw that as well. This just shows you a diff of the files with rich links. You can see here, the ticket is highlighted and the PR itself. So while it's giving transparency to the entire organization and those people who are deploying, it's also allowing the ability to easily jump into those systems and get more information if you want it, which is very nice. Now we get to something new. So the beauty of this is once you're in QA and you need another human to be part of the process, you're already in Slack. You can easily call them out and say, hey, Paul, who happens to be sitting right there, I need you to help QA this. And Paul can then say, oh, wait, what is this? Oh, I have a link to it. I have a link to the PR. I can look exactly what it's supposed to do, and I can help you out. That all happens in real time. There's no context switching for anybody, which is fantastic. So say Paul QAs it, and it was broken. It was an exclamation point, or maybe I put the period in the wrong place. Something went wrong. The beauty of this is everyone is aware of what went wrong, and there's embarrassment bestowed upon the individual that made the PR. And we're able to take the appropriate action based on the insight that we have from these systems. So in this case, the appropriate action is obviously to not go to production because there's a bug. So you're able to click no, just simply cancel the deployment. On the coordination front, because this is in a channel, because all the engineers are in the channel, they see everything happening in real time. They're able to coordinate around when deployments happen, and there's a natural queuing system that took place, right? So we didn't have to build anything to set up a queue. It's just people saying, hey, I'm going next, and it works pretty much perfectly. We deploy a lot now, so queues actually do happen. Even though deployments are very fast, we deploy so often that people are waiting. So that's pretty cool. Last thing to note is DMs, right? So Slack provides the ability to send a DM. This allows us to make sure people aren't dropping the ball on deploys. So our deployment tool will ping you directly in a DM if you have actionable messages waiting. So for example, you put code into QA, you go get a coffee, you go to lunch, what have you, you forget about it. This thing's gonna ping you and say like, oh, you're kind of jamming the queue up here. People need to do their work. You kind of need to respond to this. So this is basically to make sure no one falls asleep at the wheel. And at the very end of your deployment, given that it all goes well, you're going to get a long-lived confirmation message detailing exactly what was deployed. And Slack is going to index this for you so you can search for it later. You can, end of the day, have a nice view of exactly what went out and by who. And if you see here, our average deploy now takes 6 minutes. So we went from 1 day to 6 minutes, which is a difference of like a long time. It's night and day, really. So the last thing I want to talk about is the fact that we now have a built-in audit trail. Deployment process is great. What if we need to know what happened when? Slack, indexing, it's great, but we went a step farther to build out a DynamoDB that just stores every step of every deploy in a database table. So if we want to look up what happened on a given day, we can easily do that. It's part of a slash command. Instead of slash deploy, we call slash Audit or something, and it's all there. So we went from a really manual system to a fully automated solution in Slack, and it took us from 4 deploys a month to over 100. It really unlocked a lot of potential, and it unblocked a lot of the dependencies that we had. So all the stuff I talked about with waiting a week to deploy stuff, different apps depending on different other apps, and having to wait to make sure those went out at the same time, this stuff was all unlocked by this deployment tool. It led to happier engineers, happier product people. They knew what was going out when, and happier customers because we were able to ship a lot faster. So all in all, cool story, but why do you care? Well, because you can do it. So Heroku has productized this, which is validating. It's called Heroku Chat Ops, and it's not as fully featured as the tool I'm demoing tonight, but it's a good start. So if you don't run your deploys and chat interfaces, it's a good place to look. You can also write your own. It didn't take us all that long to write this. It's just a wrapper around APIs. We all know and deal with JSON all day. So not a hard thing to accomplish. And what you're really getting is the best of both worlds, right? So you're getting the best of CI and CD, and you're getting the best of Slack, and it's completely intuitive. So the best of CI CD is that you have well-managed risks. Releases are super fast. You're minimized your risk. You ship almost every day, if not multiple times a day. No one messes up the deploy because they physically can't. You have a modular system, so you have all those different tools. You can swap them in and out as you need to. And lastly, you have developer ownership. So once you have this pipeline in place, someone can start at your company and build and ship something very quickly, which gives them buy-in to the product and the team, and goes a long way as far as people feeling good about what they're doing on a daily basis. You also get all the benefits of Slack right out of the box, right? So you get the transparency. Everyone's in the know throughout the entire process. It's real time. It's intuitive to use. Everyone knows how to send a text message. Everyone knows how to click a button. It's fully searchable for later. So every time you do a release, you have a full history of, I can search for, the release that someone failed 3 weeks ago and make fun of them if I want to. And there's mobile support, right? So Slack supports phones very well. Speaking of which, I think we should probably go ahead and finish that deployment from my phone, which is something I've never even dreamed of doing, but let's go ahead and do that. So we're gonna go back to the deployment channel and look, it is ready to go. So I'm gonna try to find this on my phone. We're gonna go ahead and click this button though. I'll do the prod one from the phone, how about that? Cool, so I clicked yes, and just like that, it copied all those artifacts over, and now it's in QA, right? So now I can ping Paul if I wanted to. He's sitting over there, so I'm gonna test it for you, Paul. We're gonna go into our QA environment. And we're gonna make sure that period is there. And look, there it is, boom. There's my period. So let's put it in prod. And I'm gonna do it, I'm actually gonna do it for my phone because it finally loaded, sweet. So I'm gonna go to prod, click yes. And it is copying files now. And look, it's finished. Everything's been deployed. Release has been tagged. It's in master. Should be good to go. Let's check prod. Refresh. There's the period. So we accomplished a lot this evening. We deployed a period to production. Anyway, before I leave you, I want to leave you with a quote. Before I take questions, also. Let's see. Because we had a lot of military jargon this evening, I think we should end with a quote from a pacifist, as I myself once dabbled in pacifism. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "A CI for a CI makes the whole world see." And with that, questions?
What happens if someone like gets in the way in the middle of your deploy, like merge something else in or break something else and it can't go through? Does the bot just freak out? Does it help you resolve the state? Does it just bail out in the deploy?
Yeah, so because of so the way we set it up, and this is just our process, you could probably encode the bot to do a lot of different things, is all of our PRs have to be fast forward only on master. So no one has permission to actually merge anything. Only the bot does, right? So, and because the bot blocks the app on the app level, that situation would never actually happen for us. But that's something we've encoded in the bot, right? So the good thing about building your own is like you have control to do that kind of thing. But yeah, I could see a situation where if someone did have permission to go in, they could potentially like mess up your deployment in process. But because we can encode all the information in the bot, like no one can do it. So.
The microphone is in the box. So that actually brings up the point that I was curious about. Since no one has permission to merge and Slack is occasionally inaccessible or loads slowly, what happens when you need to deploy and Slack is down? Do you have access to the bot externally?
Yeah, I mean, we have to kind of fall back to our old process of logging into all the dashboards and like doing it all manually, which sucks. And now, like when Call of Duty goes down, it's actually, that's something to mention. Like it's problematic. Like when you build upon a platform like Slack, you're kind of beholden to them being stable, which honestly most of the time is fine. But when it does go down, you are like kind of SOL and you are falling back to logging into the different systems. So yeah, we that's a good point. We'll build the CLI tool. So Slack interface is great. Will actually is one of our, he's our first engineer at Troops, and he built a CLI interface for Call of Duty. So we can actually deploy the whole thing from our Scala console, which I forgot about.
So
he likes to tout that thing.
If you don't use that, do you have to go and change the permission and then manually merge?
If we don't use the CLI, we have to go, I don't know if we've ever gotten to that situation where we had to do that. Yeah, Slack's never been down for long enough to have to worry about it. But we could, yeah, we could go change permissions or just log in as the Call of Duty user and merge it ourselves. Yeah. Anyone else?
So would it be possible to include the approval workflow into the Slack?
Yeah. So the question was it possible to include the approval workflow? That's what we've done so far. So in order to even see your pull requests in our menu, they have to have 2 GitHub approvals on it. So if I went into our menu and had pull requests with 1 approval, we wouldn't even see it. You couldn't deploy it. Does that answer your question?
No, I was asking if a team member could actually approve it from the interface.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. That's interesting. So we haven't built that into our tool. We could theoretically, but because as developers we're in GitHub enough externally already, reviewing code, it's harder to review code with a small window like Slack. We haven't built that in yet, but you certainly could. Nothing's stopping you.
So what do you do if you deploy something bad to prod, like if you need to roll it back?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we have a lot of deploys every day, and sometimes a rollback is simple as put a revert commit out, roll forward into that. We also can easily log into like the part that deploys so we have this pipeline built out, and the end of the pipeline is Amazon code deploy. So we can go into that directly and say, okay, we want to deploy this old artifact and go outside of the tool. We haven't built in like a specific rollback command. It's something we've thought about, but it hasn't happened enough The one problem around rollbacks that we've encountered is because we deploy so often, if someone finds a bug at the end of the day, you have to then trace through all the deployments to figure out where it started. That is a headache. But yeah.
So I saw in this tool, do you ever deploy multiple pull requests in like some sort of release together? Or do you find that you don't generally have to do that because the deploys are fast enough or that your changes are, you know?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good question. It was if we pulled multiple PRs together into like a release. So the way we would do that is we would just make a release branch and make sure that's fast forward only. And so a lot of times what we'll have is like a big chunk of work that we think is kind of risky, or we want to QA especially hard. We'll pull that into a separate release branch, make sure it's fast forward only on master, and then just release that through the tool. So.
Thanks.
Is any of the monitoring between deploy and merge also built into Slack, such as rollbar?
So we have, yeah, so we have rollbar webhooks, but as far as the deploy goes, we have like a second set of, the tool tells you it's successful because it's reporting from the APIs. We also have webhooks set up to say, yes, the deployment went out okay. Like, no, nothing went wrong. As far as rollbar goes, that's for us, that's more of like a logging monitoring thing. So does that answer your question? Maybe I didn't understand it right.
Just as an example here, like usually before merge, we'll like kind of let the deployed release just bake a little.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we'll sit things in an environment for a little while before we hit yes. So you'll see, like, and the beauty of Slack is you can be like, hey guys, I'm sitting this in this environment for a little while. It's going to be here. Wait on the next deployment for a couple of hours while people bang on it, kind of thing.
For the deploy to prod, it said yes or no. Is it only you that sees that, or everybody sees that?
That's a great question. We all see the buttons, but we've encoded it so only the person who starts the deployment can press them. So we just match on the Slack user ID. And if we notice that the Slack user ID is not the person who started the deploy, it gives you an ephemeral message that says, sorry, you're being a jerk. You can't do this. Yeah.
And
it doesn't actually say it.
Do you have it at the end or at any point where like you could have like a product manager, say release the prod or flip the switch or something like that, where it's not you that presses the yes or no, it's another team member? So
yeah, so we haven't done that yet. We're small enough still, being 8 engineers, that for us, an engineer just has enough ownership to run the whole process. But that would be something like, that's a perfect example of why it's good to build your own, because you can encode that sort of process directly in the tool. And one thing that's cool about that kind of thing is I've noticed it's a lot easier for a machine to tell you no than a person, because you don't get your feelings hurt, When someone tells me no, I'm like, oh, well, that's unfortunate. When machines say they can't do something, them's the rules, right? So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Cool. Well, thanks again for having me.